Hi everyone! So today we're going to talk about attachment. This is the week 10 online lecture part 1. Remember there are 2 parts to this lecture and this one's going to be all about attachment. Okay, so there are a couple different perspectives about attachment from different theorists. The first one comes from Mary Ainsworth, and she's probably the most famous for her work in attachment. And she thought of attachment as an enduring emotional bond between one animal or another person and another. So usually, since we're studying child development, let's think about this in terms of one person and another. And specifically, those people are typically a child and a parent or caregiver. Now, John Bowlby also had a theory about attachment, and he thought that attachment was really essential to the survival of the infant. So it wasn't just something that was nice to have, but it was something that was really critical for survival. And so usually, for the most part, people would refer to this in everyday language as something just as like affection or love, but it's more than that. It's more than just affection and love. It's also just a deeper emotional bond. Okay, so attachment is usually measured by something called the strange situation. And the strange situation, it usually happens in a lab, tested by researchers. And this is something that was popularized, this procedure was popularized by Mary Ainsworth herself. And so there are a few different steps to the strange situation. And there are also several different variations of the strange situation. So I'm going to present to you one specific variation of this, kind of a more basic one. So the first part of the strange situation is they bring a child and a parent, usually the mother, into a lab and they put them in a room. And in the room they play with some toys, and then a stranger comes in and talks to the mother, and then the stranger leaves. And then the mom leaves the room, and then the stranger and the baby are in the room together, and then the mother returns. So this is kind of a basic way that this could play out. Let's take another look at that with pictures, and the variation I'm going to give you is more typical. So in the first step, parent and an infant come into the lab, and as you can see, they've got it all done up to look like a fun room, and they've got toys in there and everything. And so the parent and the infant are playing with a soccer ball in this case. And then the parent sits down and baby gets to play with his ball on his own. And then a stranger comes in, and the stranger starts talking to mom. Blah, 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 blah. What are you doing? Okay, and so that happens. And then after the stranger is done talking to the parent, the stranger leaves and that conversation is over. And then mom leaves as well. Mom leaves as well after the stranger leaves. They don't leave together, they leave separately. And then the infant is left all by himself. So what happens then? The stranger comes in and offers some kind of comfort. Okay, baby, don't cry, it's all right, don't worry. And then mom comes back and greets the infant and offers some kind of comfort, and then the stranger leaves. So that's kind of the basic procedure of how the strange situation works. And what you're looking for in the strange situation is what's going on in this last phase, which is called reunion. The main thing that people look at is when the mom leaves, how does baby react? And then this picture of what we're looking at when the parent returns after being separated, how the baby reacts then, and that's called the reunion. And so depending on how kids react during that strange situation, that determines their attachment pattern. And so Mary Ainsworth in 1978 developed 4 different attachment patterns. So they go like this. The one is secure, and that's probably the most ideal situation, or the most ideal attachment pattern. And then we've got 2 different types of insecure. So we've got insecure avoidant or insecure resistant. So basically you could be securely attached or insecurely attached. And if you're insecurely attached, what kind of insecure attachment is it? Well, it's either avoidant or resistant. And then you could also fall into another category, which is disorganized attachment. And that's when none of these patterns, you're not really following any of the patterns. And so again, this is measured by the strange situation. All right, so let's talk about these attachment patterns and what they look like. So the first one is secure attachment. So in secure attachment, When mom leaves baby alone in the room, baby protests mildly. So there might be some fussing, there might be some crying, you know, they might not be very happy about the whole thing. And then during the reunion, when mom comes back in the room, they really seek out interaction. So this might look like crawling to her, looking for comfort. And then when mom does provide the comfort, the baby is comforted by that comfort. It works. So mom says, okay, baby, it's all right, picks him up, gives him a hug and a kiss, and baby starts to calm down and everything's okay and right with the world again. And so kids that are securely attached, this really has an effect on their lifelong development. So we know that kids who have secure attachment by around ages 5 and 6, if they're measured by their social development, they get along better with peers and they're just better adjusted in school than the insecurely attached children. So that's one outcome that's very closely tied to secure attachment, is this peer relation and social adjustment. Now let's take a look at insecure attachment. And we'll start by looking at insecure avoidant attachment. So what does it look like when an infant is insecure avoidant attached? So when the mom leaves, they're not very distressed. They start to play, they don't really fuss. And then when mom returns, they kind of ignore her. They ignore her. And researchers have found that part of the reason why children could be insecurely attached is because they haven't been receiving consistent loving care from the mother. So maybe going to her when she leaves, it's no big deal because you're kind of used to that. And when she returns, you're not going to go to her because she hasn't been providing you comfort anyway. So what's the point of going? You kind of learned that it doesn't really help because if I'm upset, she's not going to do anything to help it. And then we have the other kind of insecure attachment, which is resistant. And so resistant insecure attachment is when the mom leaves at separation, they're very emotional, they show strong signs of distress, but then when mom returns, they're kind of ambivalent. And ambivalent means you're sort of between two things. So you're clinging to her and trying to get support, but then you're pushing her away too. You know, at the same time, you're pushing her away, but then you go to her and you kind of go between those things, not having a very easy time being comforted by the mom upon return. So again, this type of insecure attachment also relates to home life. So it's an indicator of what things are like at home. So if things are inconsistent at home, then a baby might come out with this kind of attachment pattern. Okay, and then let's talk disorganized attachment. This one's a little bit complicated. This one is just really contradictory behaviors. So they seem dazed, confused, disoriented. They're really not following any of these specific paths. So it's more rare to have disorganized attachment than secure or insecure. This is very rare, but it's not following these consistent patterns as the other ones were. And so disorganized attachment also has some pretty negative outcomes. One negative outcome in particular is that if you are not labeled, but if you're tested as insecurely attached at age 1, that means that you're more likely to be at risk for psychological disorders at age 17. So it's not very good if you don't have this strong emotional attachment bond to your caregiver. That can lead to some severe psychological problems. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about some cross-cultural considerations. So as with all research, we have to think about what sample was being used. Who were they testing in these procedures? And so we know that the strange situation was developed in the United States using a sample of mostly European American individuals. That's how this was normalized. This study was standardized using this sample. Also, the participants were mostly Western, so the United States is in the Western world. And some researchers, after this strange situation came out, kind of took a look at Ainsworth's work and said, hey, well, how does this play out in other cultures across the world? And so one famous study from Van Isendorn and Cronenberg looked at the difference between individual and collectivist cultures. So these are cultures that individualist culture is a culture where the values of society really lie within self-achievement and self-promotion, such as in the United States. So, you hear things like a self-made man or people who really kind of make their way in the world on their own. And a collectivist culture is something a little bit different. It's where families sort of go at it together, and a community is a little bit more important than individual success is community success. And individualistic cultures are more likely to be in West, so in Europe or in the United States. These are considered to be individualistic cultures. And collectivist cultures are more likely to be in the East, so more Asian countries are collectivist cultures. So that's exactly what Van Ezendoorn and Cronenberg looked at. And what they found was that across all the countries they looked at, and they looked at several countries across the world, they found that secure attachment was the most common attachment pattern in all countries. So the most common. So that's a good thing, because we know that secure attachment leads to better social adjustment. And so we know that most kids worldwide are securely attached. That's great. That's great news for kids. However, the differences turned up when they started to look at types of insecure attachment. So when kids were insecurely attached, which is more rare than secure attachment, it's more rare, but when you're insecurely attached, there's a difference in what type of insecure attachments that you would have. So what they found was in Western countries, when kids were insecurely attached, they were more likely to be the anxious avoidant, but in Eastern countries, they were more likely to be ambivalent or resistant attachment. So that's kind of a difference that they found, and here's a table of their work that illustrates this point. So they sort of typed them as type A, type B, and type C, and they didn't even put them in the order of A, B, and C, they put them in the order of frequency, but type B is securely attached, and type A is anxious avoidant, and type C is anxious resistant. And so we call them insecure avoidant or insecure resistant, but you can also be called anxious avoidant, anxious resistant. And here you can see some of the countries they looked at. This table is truncated, but you can see some of the countries that they looked at. You'll notice that this was in 1988, so there was still such a thing as West Germany and East Germany then. So they looked at West Germany, Great Britain, the Netherlands, Sweden, Israel, Japan, China, and the United States. And as you can see, in all of these countries, type B, or secure attachment, was the most common type of attachment. So that's good for the kids. But then types A and C are the different types of insecure attachment, or anxious attachment as they called it in this study. And here you can see that in West Germany there were a lot more kids who were anxious avoidant than anxious resistant. And that trend was kind of flipped. If you look down to Japan, or Israel, the trend is kind of flipped. So you'll see that these kids are more likely, when they're going to have insecure attachment or anxious attachment, it's more likely to be anxious resistant than avoidant. So that kind of makes you think that there are some cultural factors going on that influence the way parents parent their children. And the way that they go about their daily lives has a real impact on what these outcomes are for social development for the kids. Okay, so that is all I have for you for today. What I would like you to do now is go into your groups. No, what I would like you to do now is watch the next lecture, which is part 2.